Что такое советская власть?
Be clear here, not confused. I'm a socialist.
Chile is rich. Only the people are poor.
As long as they're working class, you'll have a communist party.
What's that book I got? The Russian guy? Stalin. I got that.
Fidel Castro, support our struggle to the hilt.
It is impossible for capitalism to answer the needs of the American people.
If I am a revolutionary, and you're going to have to keep on saying that.
And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
We are bound to transform society. As far as crushing the party, it's impossible to crush the party because the party is one with the people.
There's capital versus labor. Because there's always conflict.
You don't mean exactly peace talks, you mean capitulation, surrendering. That's kind of conversation between the sword and the neck, you mean.
We know that what we are facing here is actually American imperialism and not only Israel.
The pattern of development in our society has been consistently to deprive the working people of the capacity to make choices.
There is a new African in the world. That new African is ready to fight his own battle and show that after all, the black man is capable of managing his own affairs.
Are we seeing like the collapse of the empire?
That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere.
And the crisis in the capitalist world has been deep.
La lucha armada es el único camino para la liberación.
But that's all right, because we said even before this happened, and we're going to say it after this, and after I'm locked up, and after everybody's locked up, that you can jail revolutionaries, but you can't jail a revolution. Bye.
Yes, hello. It's been some time. It's been about almost a year since we did a show. Last show we did was on decolonial Marxism with Rick from Decolonized Buffalo. And I might talk about the drama with me and Rick at the very end of the show because it doesn't deserve to be at the top of this. But yeah, it's been a long time. It's a lot's happened in my life. Hell, even today my car broke down. So, I mean, it's been a crazy year for everyone, I think. It's been a roller coaster, to say the least. I appreciate everyone for tuning in, checking out the show. Hit the like button, share the show, all that YouTuber BS. Get out of the way. And then also, I'm in a new room. I had to reset everything. So let me know about sound. Let me know about, is the quality coming out okay? If it's not, please let me know. If you cannot hear me or if the video keeps cutting out, anything like that, let me know in the chat, in the live chat on YouTube or on Twitch. But yes, we have a lot to get to. Obviously, it's been almost a year of the show. We have a lot to talk about in terms of Palestine. That's going to be at the top. We're going to talk about the elections. It's a week away, give or take, just a few days. I think it's like, 8 or 9 days away. And it's been a lot of debate, a lot of division in the communist movement here in the U.S. about the election and sort of electoral strategies, and not even just the communist movement, like the overall left. It's definitely been a divisive year that a lot of people have had very heated opinions about, to say the least. And I have some opinions. Obviously, being in a safe blue state, not as maybe strong opinions as maybe some people in swing states, but we'll get to that. I might talk about Cuba as well for a little bit, but we're not going to stay too long. It's the first show in like a year. So let's get just, back on the horse, so to speak. Let's start up with Palestine. It's now in a situation where, depending on what report you're looking at, whether it's like Lancet, I forget the other one, where it's 200,000 people in Gaza have been killed. The health ministry in Gaza is no longer functioning and hasn't been for some time. That's why the death toll and casualty rates really haven't drastically increased in terms of like total calculated numbers, only because the infrastructure for the government there in Gaza is no longer functioning due to Israeli genocide and colonial aggression. And it's similar to like the election. It's been a very divisive topic, I guess, in the left, when it really shouldn't be. This should be one of the simplest topics for especially communists. I'm very confused by this. I do understand the frustration, let's say, when it comes to organizers here in the U.S., when it comes to trying to find out the right strategies and tactics to actually apply pressure to the ruling class here. And, there's been some talks here locally. I know, for example, like Peace and Freedom Party put on a discussion. I think it was either Midnight Books or All Power here in LA, talking about, hey, it's been a year. Let's talk about what the strategy has been. Can we improve upon it? I think Palestinian Youth Movement also had one similar to that, maybe like a week after that, very recently. So I know that it's been that time of, hey, let's talk about strategies and tactics, what hasn't been working. And I understand that's been a conversation. And I'll probably touch on it in a second, but I want to first talk about kind of what's happening in Gaza for, I guess, those that may not know it. If you're watching this, you probably do. But at this point, northern Gaza is completely cut off from the outside world. Last time I checked, it's been 2 or 3 weeks since any outside aid has gotten into North Gaza. I believe the UN has come out and said that everyone within northern Gaza is at risk of dying. Like, that's a direct quote. So it's getting extreme, and obviously, Sinwar, the one of the leaders of Hamas, he wasn't the authoritative leader of Hamas, but one of the key leaders of Hamas, obviously being killed in a really heroic last stand, that will probably come to bite the Israeli propaganda arm in the ass for putting it out there. We've seen Palestinian Liberation Movement increase its activity, and also unity amongst different factions, whether it's PFLP, whether it's DFLP, whether it's Hamas, whether it's the Islamic Jihad movement, whatever it is. We've seen much more coordinated attacks if you've been paying attention as of late. I think that's been in direct response to the increased aggression by Israel. And, at this point in time, I know Breakthrough News did a really good video on this, detailing and showing a bunch of clips talking about the Israeli government is on the record for stating that this isn't an extermination campaign. This is a move to completely settle Gaza. And after that, it will be the West Bank. Like, that's the next move, is to completely eliminate any sort of Palestinian sovereignty as soon as possible. And, there obviously have been some small movement within the Israeli society that's predominantly Palestinian, Palestinians that are living within occupied Palestine, Israel. They've been at the forefront of any sort of anti-government action. Obviously, like Hadash, the Israeli Communist Party, they've been at the forefront of it, so to speak. But it still hasn't been enough to sort of switch that paradigm within the Israeli society, which is still deeply settler colonial. Like, it's 100% gonna stay that way, at least for the foreseeable future, unless we see, in my opinion, and this is really maybe we'll get to like the meat of it. The way this is going to go down, so to speak, is through Palestinian liberation meaning that I know for us in the U.S. as organizers, as communists, as leftists, we do focus a lot on what we're doing, as we should. We should focus on solidarity efforts and actions to alleviate the pressure that our comrades are facing in Palestine. But we shouldn't misjudge that to think that we're going to be the ones to liberate the Palestinians. I think this is sort of going back to like straight Marxist theory. Like, it's going to come down to the people that are the ones oppressed to liberate themselves. And we're seeing that in action. October 7th was that in action. And I think as we see Israel become more and more aggressive, rapidly aggressive, in similar ways to like South Africa, Rhodesia, where they just kept increasing the military interventions, invasions they were doing. That's sort of like the dying agony, like cries of like an empire. Like that's similar to what it is. And I think Israel right now, last I checked, is bombing, as it stands, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Yemen. They're currently involving themselves on like a 7-front war. And I think as time increases, they cannot sustain that. There's a reason why the U.S. keeps pumping money into this project, is because it needs the money to survive. If we cut off that valve, Israel would cease to exist. But the U.S. imperial ruling class needs Israel as a project to sustain its colonial dispossession and exploitation of the global South. Like Israel's a massive part of that process. And I think we can't lose sight to that. And again, coming back to centering, Palestinian struggle, Palestinians within the struggle too. We've seen with the Beijing Declaration a growing sense of national unity amongst the Palestinian National Liberation Movement. 14 factions signed on to that. Hamas, obviously, Fatah, probably the biggest ones, and the most famous in terms of like widespread public awareness. But we have, I think, 3 Marxist organizations within the Beijing Declaration, which these 14 factions are going to be the new Palestinian nation. We have almost, like 25% or 20% of those signing organizations, those signing factions are Marxist, are socialist, are communist. One of them is a fraternal party of the Communist Party here. And obviously, PFLP, DFLP, they're actively involved in the armed struggle right now that we're seeing. If you're not seeing these clips, I guess let me know in the chat and I'll tell you who to follow to find this news and to see it in real time. But this struggle is not only a key struggle in the region, but also the world because of that imperial process. The U.S. uses Israel as the jumping off point into Africa, into West Asia. There's a reason why post the Iranian Revolution was in 1979 that, and I just want to remind people that the Iran pre-revolution, obviously post the CIA coup of Mossadegh, don't want to forget that part, was like one of the biggest homes of the CIA in another country. Like it was the headquarters, I'm pretty sure, for the entire like Asian operations for the CIA was in Iran. So I think we need to keep mindful of that once we lost that as a foothold into Asia, Israel became that, and Taiwan also became that in a large way. You can maybe even argue like South Korea, Japan, the Philippines to a certain degree fill those slots in Asia, but not to the degree that Iran was, and not to the degree that Israel is to this day. There's also a fascinating aspect to where like one of the main exports of Israel is diamonds. Israel has no diamond mines at all. They're basically a distribution hub and refinement center for African diamonds. So Israel is a key link in like African neocolonialism, and Israel falling due to a national liberation movement that is deeply influenced by communism. Let's just be honest. Is a huge strike to like imperial hegemony by the U.S. And we have to think about what the sort of fallout of that is. It's significant. So I think for a lot of people that maybe are wondering, like, why are leftists, why are communists so focused on Palestine? That's why. Like, yes, from like a moral sense, like it's a genocide happening. We're of course against genocide, but it's also a key national liberation struggle against imperialism. And I think once Israel goes as an imperial project, as a settler colonial project, you will see West Asia significantly change, significantly, in my opinion. It's a key aspect of what's been or what's allowed the U.S. to hold certain sections of West Asia backwards, you know, like whether it's their influence of Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, etc. Like it's Israel's that launching point. It has been. I also want to sort of segue, if we can, quickly. Frank in the chat over on Twitch saying, Matt, how you doing, bro? I'm good, Frank. It's been a while. It's been a long time. It's good to see you. Guillotine enthusiast over on YouTube. Oh, I was frozen there for a second. I'm back, I think. Good to see you again. Good to see you again, friend. It's been a while. It's been a while. Sorry, I should never break out into song. But, you know, speaking of Palestine, it's been the also divisive topic, it feels like, of the elections. You know, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and I'm not going to get into, like, Harris, you know, coming in for Biden. Like, that's old news. I'm not going to get into the weeds of that. But I do want to talk about certain aspects of the election that seem to be divisive and give my thoughts on it. Try to be the bridge between these two groups, because I have comrades, I think, on both sides. And if I can, I'm going to sort of lay out these two opposing sides in this discussion of electoral strategy this election cycle. And obviously, comrades, if you feel like you're representative of either side and you feel like I'm misrepresenting that side, let me know in the chat. I don't want to mischaracterize a faction of the left, so to speak, when it comes to this argument. I think it is a valid discussion, even though it's one that we've had as a left for a very, very long time. This is not a new discussion at all. Maybe its application to today is new because it's, you know, today's material conditions are not the same as yesterday, but beside the point. Palestine has been the thing to divide the left on electoral strategy when it comes to Kamala Harris, when it comes to tactical support of Democrats against MAGA fascism, against Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Now, the two sides to this debate, one side states that Donald Trump is an extreme danger of fascism in the U.S., of the U.S. becoming overtly fascist, and not just having fascist elements or fascistic elements. It's becoming fully fascist if Donald Trump gets a second term due to Project 25. And, you know, if you're into politics, you've heard this a lot. So I'm not going to go into that. But that is the gist of it, that support for Kamala Harris in swing states is a tactical move to make sure that the battleground we're fighting on is not as difficult as it would be under Trump. That if it was Trump, we would have to be playing defense. While with Kamala Harris, we would be able to play offense. That's the gist of one side of this debate. The other side is stating that Kamala Harris and the Democratic establishment don't represent easier terrain to struggle in. And they will often name certain things, whether it's police crackdown on the Palestinian student encampments, whether it's the increase of federal fascist foreign policy, whether it's in regards to Palestine, the border wall, etc. And that voting for Kamala Harris is inherently a vote for also fascism. That is a vote for supporting the genocide in Palestine, supporting her fascist policies, and therefore we cannot vote for her. We have to vote for Jill Stein, Claudia de la Cruz, whoever else, Cornel West, somebody else that is going to be better on Palestine, going to be better on certain other policies. I will also add that for the former argument, not the one I just stated, the former one, that was more supportive of the tactical alliance, so to speak, with the Democratic Party, that, she's better on labor, up until a few days ago, better on trans rights. And I'll get into that, I guess. But that is sort of, again, the gist of those two arguments, those two factions, the divide in the U.S. left with this election. Now, if I can be a little bit pedantic, I don't know if that's the right word for this, but I think it is. I think a lot of this is sort of missing the forest for the trees. One, this is a conversation that seems to be really divorced from theory and history. As a guy that is sort of theory and history mindset. Hold on. If you read a lot of our history, the left history, communist history, this is a conversation we've had. This isn't a new conversation. So whenever this is brought up, I feel like it's very often not historically sort of bounded, so to speak. It's very much talking about the here and now. And I think the historical context for this conversation is very, very important, and I will get into it. Also, I think that for a lot of us, it's very hard to decenter ourselves. And not to sort of tip my hat to sort of where I lean. I'll be honest, I do lean a certain way in this debate, though I do see a lot of argument for the other side. That when we're talking about this election and then talking about Palestine as an issue, right? What's often, I think, sort of brushed aside is the fact that both parties will continue this genocide. And yes, maybe Trump will increase it more quickly. But fundamentally speaking here, and I think both parts of this debate, both factions of this divide, understand this, that whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, the genocide of Palestinians does not stop by this election. The 30-day window for the arms embargo is a joke. It's outside the election window. There's a recent State Department official that resigned and basically said it was a PR stunt. I think she was interviewed on Democracy Now! If I'm mistaken. Apologies. But, that centering us and Palestine in this who to vote for, who to support conversation. It's not really who to support, because it's not like communists are out there saying like, oh, support Trump instead of Kamala Harris. But it's Kamala Harris or a third party, right? That one, again, those third party candidates will not win. Fundamentally, we know that. So we're left with this huge contradiction where exceedingly the American public is against the genocide in Palestine. Exceedingly so, we have been out there in the streets. We have been organizing. We're seeing a slow start to Palestine student encampments again now that school's back in session. So it seems like the entire momentum is for an arms embargo. If you look at the polls, you would think that Kamala Harris and her team would look at it and say, well, a lot of people would like us if we did an arms embargo. Why, let's do it. But they don't do that. They don't. We see them hedging votes in swing states, right? So it's clearly not enough pressure. Whatever it is we're doing, it's not enough to get them to change their imperial policy. So we have to we have to, I think, be quite honest with ourselves that we're not the important ones in this conversation about Palestinian liberation. That what we do in this election does not get us there. What the Palestinians are doing in Gaza and the West Bank, what Hezbollah and other resistance movements are doing in Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, that is going to produce Palestinian liberation and self-determination. It's not going to be us. And it's not to like get us off the hook in that struggle, but I think it's just to have a sober assessment of it. And another thing I want to talk about is that, again, the historical context, the theoretical context, right? If I can, I'm going to read a section of a book. It's quoting Marx. Technically, I'm just reading Marx. But the book is The Ballot, The Streets, or Both by August Nimitz. He's a Trotskyist. So, if you're a Marxist-Leninist out there, you're going to have to sort of get over some parts in the book. But anyways, now this is a rebuttal to the anarchists, right? After the Paris Commune. Hold on, there's another one. Sorry about this. I just want to make sure here it is. No, it's the one I actually wanted. It's an assessment of the 1848 revolutions, right? And talking about, Marx and Engels after that in 1850, wrote a few things talking about what went wrong, what can we do right, obviously like people think about like the 18th Brumaire as one, the address to the Central Authority to the League, March 1850. That's the one where I'm getting this from. Quote, that everywhere workers' candidates are put up alongside the bourgeoisie Democratic candidates, that they are, as far as possible, members of the League, the Communist League, and that their election is promoted by all means possible, even when there is no prospect whatever of their being elected. The workers must put up their own candidates in order to preserve their independence, to count their forces, and to lay before the public their revolutionary attitude and party standpoint. In this connection, they must not allow themselves to be bribed by such arguments of the Democrats as, for example, that by so doing, they are splitting the Democratic Party and giving the reactionaries the possibility of victory. The ultimate purpose of all such phrases is to dupe the proletariat. The advance which the proletariat party is bound to make by such independent action is infinitely more important than the disadvantage that might be incurred by the presence of a few reactionaries in the representative body. If from the outset the Democrats come out resolutely and terroristically against the reactionaries, the influence of the latter in the elections will be destroyed in advance. Now, there's a lot there that I think, even though it's talking about failed bourgeois revolutions against semi-feudal structures 170 something years ago, there is some universality in that particularity of that quote. And I want to talk about the independence of the working class movement. I think a lot of us need to have discussions within our own organizations about how can we actually get that. I know a lot of us have talked about the local level, and obviously that does not get as much publicity. So I understand why, for example, like the Green Party and PSL are running presidential candidates and why those elections get the most media spotlight, right? Compared to like the down ballot elections, right? Like Lalo Vargas, PSL candidate here in LA for city council. I guarantee most people in the U.S. did not know about him. People in the left in the U.S. do not know about him. I guarantee most people in the left in the U.S. know about Claudia de la Cruz and Jill Stein. Guaranteed. And that's because it's the presidential election, right? So I think we need to understand that we're at this point where both parties are dead set to get us as a dying empire. Like they're dead set on driving this car off the ship. Like that is really what it is. And hold on 1 second. Both parties aren't going to avoid or dislodge from the imperial policies, the settler colonial policies we still have. The U.S. economy is still 100% built on the dispossession and exploitation of indigenous nations. 100%, whether it's indigenous nations in Africa, Latin America, whatever. It's 100% built on that. So we have to strike a chord with our strategy and tactics at getting that independence. And if we want to keep doing the local route, which is fine. I mean, look, we can do, hold on. There we go. We can do the local route. I hope that sounds better. It sounds better on my end. I was really low there. But we need to do it at an increased rate. We need to do it at a rate that actually achieves some sort of political shift, right? And that's not happening, right? And I don't know why. I'm not clued in on these organizations and everything they're doing. But Green Party is spending a lot of money on the presidential election. And not saying they shouldn't. As the Marx quote just read, the viability of winning isn't the key factor. I think it's maybe more of an important factor for organizers to think about because of the lack of resources we have. But regardless, I think it's good that PSL and Green Party are running these presidential elections. I think it's good that there is that struggle over the Democratic Party line. I think that shows that there is class struggle here. And I think people need to be rather honest here that if the Democratic Party wanted to win without it being close, they can do that. They can change certain policies. At the very end of that quote, it talks about how if the Democrats go after the reactionaries, like terroristically is the word Marx used, which is funny. But they go after the reactionaries terroristically. That there's no, like, it's not a worry then. Like the concern about reactionaries is no longer a concern because the bourgeois Democrats should be able to deal with them if they go after them as strongly as they go after us. But the reality is that Kamala Harris and the Democratic establishment has not put enough daylight between them and MAGA Republicans. Like, it's really weird to see Harris get up there and like campaign on like, hey, we did the border policy that Trump could never do. Like, that's weird. When she's asked about what will you do for the trans community, and she says, I'll follow the laws as anti-trans laws are coming into place. Like, you're not going after the reactionaries. So it's a weird conversation. It's a weird debate to have because it puts the onus on us, a very small group of people. Also, like a self-eating aspect to it, right? Like it's a self-fighting aspect to it. It's infighting, I should say. It's mainly communists and other leftists going after other communists and other leftists about not supporting Kamala because Trump is fascist. But she's out there stating over and over again that like her policies are very similar to his. So is it on us to like ignore that? It's a weird dynamic. And I understand that like Trump is worse than Kamala Harris. Like, I'm not an idiot, right? Like, I know that the National Labor Relations Board has a high chance of getting gutted under Trump, right? Like, that's a possibility, not probability, but it's a possibility. That wouldn't happen under a Democratic president, even one like Kamala Harris. Like, that's just not going to happen, right? But then we're immediately centering ourselves in this conversation again. If I can be so bold, there's a really good book, Settler Colonialism by Cy Englert. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Cy. Great book. Highly recommend it. If you haven't read it, read it. I'm gonna just read off if I can. If I can find the page real fast, I should be able to. Really, here it is. This was a slogan by working class movement organizers in South Africa in 1922. Workers of the world, unite and fight for a white South Africa. Now, obviously, U.S. leftists just focusing on U.S. labor over like genocide isn't the exact same as like settlers in South Africa 100 years ago going out there quoting Marx and saying we want only a white South Africa. It's not exactly the same, but it's an example of how in a settler society, working class struggles can often ignore the indigenous struggle, often center the settler workers at the expanse of indigenous sovereignty. And to me, and this is only me, and again, I'm in a safe blue state. So those out there in battleground states, I get the conundrum. I'll be honest. I have empathy. Like, I get it. So I'm talking maybe from a privileged standpoint here. And as a white man, like, I'm also privileged in that standpoint because it's Trump. Trump's not going after us white men. He's going after everyone else. So I get it. But when we're talking about, the Democratic establishment policies, whether it's at the border, whether it's foreign policy against China, Palestine, Africa, Latin America, whatever, right? To then counter that argument, well, they're really good with labor. They protect the labor. To me, it harkens back to these really horrific examples where settler workers did not have solidarity with oppressed nations. That's what it, to me, feels like. We saw Biden not too long ago, maybe like a day or two ago. It was very recent. Go out there and apologize for the residential schools for indigenous nations, which was forcibly taking children away from their families and, in a sense, forcibly trying to assimilate them into white society, white civilization. And a lot of children went missing. A lot of children were killed, abused. It was absolutely a form of genocide, or a tactic of genocide, I should say. Biden went out there and apologized, even though he got heckled about Palestine. Shout out to that person. You're a hero. But, as that was happening, we have the Biden administration forcibly taking indigenous land at the border. So it's confusing here, like Tim Walz, right? Everyone talks about Tim Walz, how great he's been for indigenous nations, but if memory serves me correctly, he's the one that sent in state troopers against Standing Rock, and that struggle. Like, Tim Walz had a huge part to play in suppression of an indigenous movement. So we're being told by a certain segment of the left, and I'm not trying to hate on any of y'all. I love y'all. I want you to hear me and respond. Honestly, I there's parts here where I'm very confused, and there's some of you that I really respect. So if you're seeing this, if you're watching this, and you have the patience to deal with my bullshit, thank you. I want a response. I want a rebuttal, not to debate, but because I think there's an important argument here about tactics and strategies, about the balance of forces, about what does fascism mean in a settler colonial society like the US that's already the imperial hegemon. These are important theoretical and material questions. So I'm not going to presume to have the answers. I also want to make that very clear. I don't know where I was going with that. Oh, I remember. But anyways, harkening back to these examples, the Bacon's Rebellion's another one, where it was mainly white indentured labor. There was also black indentured labor that rebelled in New England. I forget the exact year, for better regulations, basically, on indentured servants, and the result was further dispossession of indigenous land to give white indentured servants that were freed basically their land. That's what they rebelled for. They wanted more land. They wanted to settle. They didn't want to be pseudo slaves anymore as white labor. So that's what happened. And anyways, again, read the book. Read the fucking book. Read it. Read it. It would change your life. Digressing. But these conversations about censoring us, labor, the working class, woe is me, we can't have Trump, so let's actively support Kamala Harris. That part's really hard for me. It's very difficult because, again, it harkens back to these chauvinistic moments in the class struggle in our history in settler colonial societies. And I think Guillotine in the chat saying they brought in Dick fucking Cheney. Yeah, they did. Yes. Yeah. The guy that has millions of people's blood on his hands. Yes. They brought him in. But I mean, hey, it's kind of on brand. If we're being quite honest, it's very on brand for the current administration that's increasing Palestinian genocide. Just, it's not that far off in my mind. But anyways, so that's where I'm at, to be quite honest, is that, again, how do we decenter ourselves in this struggle? And on top of that, how do we actually find a pathway for some sort of success, whatever that is, right? Is Jill Stein and the uncommitted movement or whatever it is, right? Are those moments of public awareness, are those successes? Is that the success we take away from this election cycle? I don't know yet. I don't know if we can mark that as a success. We don't know what, for example, PSL's vote is going to look like. Are they increasing their voter turnout? Is there more people going for an overt socialist candidate? We don't know yet. So there's a lot of answers here that or a lot of questions here that we get answered maybe after the election, but I still don't think we get all of them answered. Because regardless, let's say it's Kamala Harris elected, okay, the Palestine genocide still happening. Indigenous dispossession in the U.S. is still ongoing. We still have a massive issue with her border policy, her foreign policy that is completely fascist, that is only hurting the imperialized and colonized people of Latin America, the recolonized people of Latin America. It's wild to me. And we're going to have to do that with an element here where Harris is probably coming in, the Democratic Party is coming in on a big high because they won and they didn't need us. They didn't need Arab Americans or Muslim Americans, because that's a difference. For example, most Muslim Americans are black in the U.S. Arabs don't represent the majority of Muslims in the U.S. But digressing, it's going to be a sign for her and the Democratic establishment that we're doing just fine. So we're not going to get this liberal left alliance that we saw in 2016, 2020, right? And if Trump's elected, we get a guy that what most people agree is an overt fascist, right? Elected again. So what does that say about the U.S. that we keep electing overt fascists? The Palestinian genocide will increase. More attacks, on the LGBTQ plus community, more attacks on oppressed nationalities within the U.S. Like, it's just going to increase and get worse. And like, yes, we have maybe the left liberal alliance back, right? But to what end? Like, to go back on this fucking cycle? Like, there has to be a point here where the left does get, and by the left, I mean the working class, and not only the working class, but also oppressed nations. That's a huge part to this too. There's a reason why I keep bringing up indigenous nations in this show. There's a really good article on People's World that came out talking about the native wall in terms of like an electoral block, right? And to use that somewhat as my analysis here, like the native wall, quote unquote, is a huge aspect to this struggle. We are a settler colonial society. So if we want liberation, right, if we want an end to exploitation, we have to look at who is the group that is the most oppressed and exploited in this system, right? There's a reason why, like Marx, for example, looked at like the working class, right? Not only because they were like, in a sense, the most oppressed group within this new capitalist system, but also they were a key part to the capitalist process and production, right? Well, if we use that analysis, right, and we look at settler colonial societies, right, and not Western European societies coming from feudalism to capitalist development, right? We're not seeing that, even though there is a connection there, right? But it's more historical materialist than like pure universalist. But digressing. When we're looking at settler colonial societies, the basis of them, the foundation for their surplus value, so to speak, is indigenous dispossession and sometimes exploitation, right? Not always, but it's dispossession. I think that's the best word. David Harvey talked about, accumulation by dispossession. That's another way to look at it too, that it's not just primitive accumulation, but it's this continual process of dispossession, right? There was an article by John Pittman in Political Affairs, I think in like 1973. It was right after the occupation of Wounded Knee, and talked about how like 97% of indigenous sovereign land was stolen by the U.S., right? And that the remaining 3% was still being, or at least attempted to be taken over by the U.S. at that point in time. So this is 1973. This is within like our parents' lifetimes. Maybe for some of you listening, your lifetime. No judging out there for us old heads out there, but just saying, like, it's within lifetime. It's within a lifetime that native nations here had 3% of their land that they had, and it was still being like assaulted. It was still being dispossessed, and we see that to this day. That whether it's green energy projects that the U.S. federal government is putting on and taking away native land to use for those green energy projects, right? Or whether it's the border wall, right? Whether it's a pure fascist policy that they're taking native land away to use for fascist policies, right? So indigenous dispossession is a very central key aspect to the production of settler colonial societies. Think about like, and I try to explain this before to other people, like think about every factory in the U.S., Think about every mine, every timber yard, every whatever, right? That's not on original U.S. land. There's no such thing as original U.S. land. The U.S. is a settler colonial project, manifestation of capitalism and colonialism, right? Like that's what it is. And it was created at the expense of and the dispossession of indigenous nations. So all of our industrial base, all of our mining base is on stolen land right now. All of our harbors are on stolen land right now. So everything in the U.S. economy, functionally speaking, is a result of indigenous dispossession. So striking at that is a direct undermining of the entire U.S. system, the entire U.S. capitalist system. So when we're talking about like communist organizations or leftist organizations, right, that they're constantly focusing on like labor. And I'm not saying that that's not important, right? But you're using analysis and theory out of time and out of space, right? Like in the battle at the streets are both, right? Marx literally says that it is up to the proletariat to liberate itself, right? When we're looking at the settler colonial society, you have to adjust that. You have to adjust that paradigm. Walter Rodney talks about that. Like you have to look at the universality within theory, that it on paper isn't universal, but within it is some sort of universality. And that's what you have to find. And not to divorce it from its time and space, but to adapt it, to update it. And that's what Marxism is. And again, I just feel like a lot of this discussion just ignores that question, that fundamental question. And then the conversations about what do we do ultimately get left to like who, like which is the most progressive Democrat to support, or, you know, how can we block, you know, overt fascism from taking over while still having like this horrible genocidal project as the U.S. exists. Like it's a weird dynamic, or you get into weird conversations, weird debates, circular ones that you don't get out of. And I think trying to build those bridges between oppressed nations within the U.S., within the most progressive sections of the working class, is an alliance that needs to happen. But it's only because it expedites the process, right? Like, if we didn't have the ecological crisis, right? If we don't have to worry about time, right? I would say without a doubt that at some point the U.S. would fall purely due to the internal contradictions from internal colonies. That's all. And external colonies too. That dynamic alone will overthrow the U.S. empire. The U.S. working class can kind of push it off the ledge, can kind of help out. That's how I look at it. And finding out how we can help out is like the question. And I don't think talking about ad nauseum like, oh, like Kamala Harris isn't a fascist. Is she a fascist? You know, can we push her left on Palestine? Like, I don't understand why we're having those conversations, to be honest. The election's already decided. It's decided without us, in my opinion. At this point in time, it's decided. We have to decide what to do next. What we're going to do the day after. You know, I think those are the conversations we need to start having. And on top of that, we need to find a way to get political independence back, or at least to find a way to make it successful, right? Because at this point, you know, you can say like DSA as a project has not been trying to get political independence. They're completely working on an inside plan, right? We're going to work within the Democratic Party, and we're going to take it over that way. You also have, not going to get into it too much, but like CPUSA's inside-outside strategy, right? Where you work with the most progressive elements in a tactical alliance. in the Democratic Party, so to speak, and it's mostly on the local level. And then you're working outside of it to gain political independence wherever you can. And then you have PSL, Green Party, I'm assuming FRSO, though I don't know of them running elections. And they're clearly working on a completely outside strategy. We're not going to work inside the Democratic Party. Whatever it is we're all doing, it's not working to the degree we want it to. I think that's safe to say. So maybe it's time to have those conversations again about adapting our strategy and tactics. I've had this conversation with DSA people before too, that like the lack of accountability there is a huge issue. It's something that Marx talks about ad nauseum. Trust me. Yeah, he gets really mad about that. Especially like with the German Social Democratic Party, like he gets real mad about certain people, especially Bernstein. Really mad at Bernstein. So, I think again, trying to find that right balance, because we have to recognize that time is short due to the ecological crisis, and also whatever it is happening, whatever it is we're doing, fascism, right? MAGA Republicans, like they're still there. And even if Trump loses, they're still going to be there the day after. I forget like what percentage it was, but it was a majority of Americans, I want to say, supported putting, maybe it's not majority, it was like 40%, but supported like putting migrants in concentration camps. Like we're at this weird stage now where like a lot of the American public is overtly fascist, and that's been simmering for its entire history because of that settler colonial past. So that's a key element here that I think people are just forgetting, to be quite honest. I don't have any more thoughts at this point on the election. If anyone else has any thoughts, please let me know in the chat or comment after the show, obviously, if you're watching this later. Let me know your thoughts about the election. I know I've kind of been rambling, and again, sorry, it's been a year, guys. It's been a year since I've done a show. I'll get better at it again, I guess, but if I have to. But this has been a frustrating year in terms of the conversations that I've seen amongst comrades about this election. It's very frustrating, and everyone has no patience, and I get it. Like, we're all watching a genocide happen on our phones every day. Like, there's not a day that we go by without seeing dead kids, right? Like, it's traumatic, and we're not even there, So like everyone is on high intensity, high alert, So I get that emotions are flying high. But I think that if I can't put a bow on this conversation on the election, I think again we should focus on the day after. Whatever happens, the day after and the days after are going to be way more important at this point in time. Like, the die is cast. We're getting a capitalist bourgeois president next. Sorry, folks. And we're going to have to deal with that, whether it's one that is worse than the other by the consensus or not. And we're still going to have to struggle and fight for solidarity with our Palestinian brothers and sisters. Like, we're going to have to do that. Like, that's just what we have to do. We're going to have to find new tactics and new strategies. Those are naturally going to develop too. It wasn't that long ago where I would say we were very close to having armed struggle again in like the U.S. Class movement, working class movement. What we saw on college campuses, especially ones like UCLA, where you saw street fighting basically between fascist thugs and Palestinian protesters and students. We were very close to qualitatively jumping to a different degree, and we didn't for whatever reason. But that's still somewhat there, like that's simmering. Like I think there's a reason why the student encampments haven't popped off in a way that they did over the summers, because I think there's a little bit of hesitancy. It's a little bit of a concern about like, hey, what can we do here, so to speak. Anyways, remember, go vote. Regardless of like Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, like there's down ballot stuff. Like here in California, there's literally a ballot measure to end slavery in 2024. Yeah, it's 2024 and we're voting on ending slavery still in the U.S. So we have a long ways to go, to say the least. I was going to talk about some other stuff, but it's been about an hour of me ranting here. So I'll cut it off there. I really appreciate everyone for tuning in. Remember, hit the like button, share the show, all that, fun stuff. I will be back maybe in a week or 2 weeks. I haven't decided if I want to do like a bi-weekly show or a weekly show. But I will be. This will be back to a regular thing, whatever it means to be a regular podcast again. If you're listening, you want to join the show. If you're an organizer out there, if you're an activist, hit me up. If you want to jump on and talk about what you're doing, what's been happening in your locality. This is an open platform to organizers and activists, so feel free. What else? Link tree down below for like all old articles, old videos. I've released a few articles in the last year. Whole series on the early life of Lenin. I did an article on Jared Horn's recent book, Armed Struggle. Highly recommend that. What else? I did an article on Pat socks, all that stuff. So don't go shit on them. Go read that article. That was fun. What else? I'll just quickly, if I can, I'll name off what I've read lately and what I'm reading. Already said, again, settler colonialism, sliding alert. Read it. Eurocentrism and the Communist Movement by Robert Beale. Absolutely a must read. Marx at the Margins by Kevin B. Anderson. That's a must read. And I also read Great Father by Francis Ball Prussia. I don't have it in front of me. I don't know where it went. It's somewhere. And I'm, like I said, I'm currently reading The Ballot, The Streets, or Both by August Nimitz, Haymarket Books. Really, really good. And I'm also reading, at the same time, Red Star Over China by Edgar Snow. Absolutely recommend this. It's fantastic. Go check it out. You can find, I think, it on PDF form somewhere. But anyways, go read some theory. Go read some history. Get involved in an organization locally. The revolution doesn't start at the election day. The revolution is going to start the day after. Have a good one. Peace.
It is impossible for capitalism to answer the needs of the American people.
If I am a revolutionary, and you're going to have to keep on saying that.
And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
We are bound to transform society. As far as crushing the party, it's impossible to crush the party because the party is one with the people.
There's capital versus labor because there's always conflict.
You don't mean exactly peace talks, you mean capitulation, surrendering. That's kind of conversation between the sword and the neck, you mean.
We know that what we are facing here is actually American imperialism and not only Israel.
The pattern of development in our society has been consistently to deprive the working people of the capacity to make choices.
There is a new African in the world. That new African is ready to fight his own battle and show that after all, the black man is capable of managing his own affairs.
Are we seeing like the collapse of the empire?
That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere.
And the crisis in the capitalist world has been deep.
La lucha armada es el único camino para la liberación.
But that's all right, because we said even before this happened, and we're going to say it after this, and after I'm locked up, and after